Are you hungry? Yes, you are. You know, it's funny, we ask this question all the time. I wonder, just like if you were to think about your past week right now, when was the last time you asked this question? Maybe you asked it to a spouse or a partner in the evening sometime, a friend or a coworker. Maybe you have kids or you work with kids and you're asking to them, are you hungry? You know, we ask questions like this all the time. Maybe you ask questions that are more about taste. Instead of saying, are you hungry? You ask things like, what do you want to eat? Or what would you like to eat? And if you really think about it, you know, we're actually talking about food all the time. We're talking about food over and over and over again during the week. We're asking people about food. We're sharing with people about food. We're chastising people about food. We're talking about food all the time because we are hungry. We're hungry. We're hungry creatures. We're hungry pretty much all the time. Our lives just go from like little states of being hungry to temporary not being hungry to then being hungry again. We're hungry over and over and over again. And there's a physical reality to us being hungry. Physical beings, physical creatures are hungry all the time because we all eat to live. All living creatures eat or consume in some way to live. Animals eat to live. Insects eat to live. Even the inanimate ones, they're not really inanimate, but ones that we think of that way, like plants and trees and coral, they all need energy to live. And we get that energy by consuming it from another source. And so all physical creatures eat and devour some other source of energy in order to live. And human beings are no different. We eat to live just like every other living creature. And so we are hungry by nature. And yet, while we're not at all different in the fact that we're physically hungry, just like any other created creature, we also can take on additional kinds of hunger beyond just physical hunger. We can be hungry for non-physical things, for immaterial things, for spiritual things. We can experience in our lives relational hungers. We can experience vocational hungers. We can experience personal hungers, maybe to feel like I'm a success or to feel like I matter. And the thing is that the spiritual hungers that we feel really are the stuff of our lives, aren't they? It's true that we subsist in relationship to our physical hungers, but we exist and live in relationship to our spiritual hungers and the way that they drive us as we seek to satisfy them. The musical Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street, is a musical about people who are hungry. The musical was originally composed and written in 1979. That was the original Broadway production with music and lyrics by the late, great Stephen Sondheim. The original cast included Angela Lansbury as the original Mrs. Lovett, and the show won the 1979 Tony Award for Best Musical. It was recently revived in 2023 and this year in 2024, starring Josh Groban and Annalee Ashford. Though late in the run, the title roles were taken over by Broadway stars Aaron Tveit and Sutton Foster. And Stanzi and I earlier this year got to go see the show before it closed, and it was wonderfully done. The chorus was just absolutely incredible. And if you were not able to see it before it closed, of course, you always can watch the very moody and stylized 2007 Tim Burton version of the movie starring Johnny Depp and Helena Bonham Carter, which would make a wonderful fall or October watch. If you're unfamiliar with the story is based actually on a 19th century Victorian penny dreadful, which in England in 19th century, penny dreadfuls were cheap, easily consumed adventure or horror novels. And there was a 19th century penny dreadful called A String of Pearls that first featured the murderous barber Sweeney Todd, who killed his customers and then pulled a lever to drop them through the floor of his second floor shop into a basement cookhouse where his co-conspirator, Mrs. Lovett, promptly turned the corpses into filler for meat pies that she sold on the street. The musical version of this question, however, raises deeper questions that we'll explore today beyond just the horrific nature of a murderous barber and cooking corpses into meat pies, including questions about social cannibalism of one another in the world and the personal cravings that drive what we do and that make us willing and able to hurt people as we seek to satisfy those cravings. It's the fall. Yay! Fun! Woo! It's fall in New York, a fun time, and we, for September, are having a little bit of fun as we kick up the fall season with a short little mini sermon series titled God on Broadway, where we will look for biblical themes from shows that have been or are on Broadway this year. So you should invite people to come and hang out and have fun. And I want to invite you because one of the shows that we're going to look at this sermon series is the show Hadestown, and we are actually going to go see Hadestown together as a church on Thursday, September 26th. We have purchased 25 tickets, and we've subsidized them at 50% off, so you can get a $25 Broadway ticket to go see Hadestown together with the rest of the church. So you need to go on to Planning Center and to Church Center and get on there, and you'll be able to just pay the $25 right through Church Center and reserve your ticket. That's Thursday, September 26th. I hope that you're there. It's going to be a really fun and wonderful time. For today, our sermon text is John chapter 6, verses 48 to 51. I'll read the text aloud, but if you have a Bible or a device, I'd encourage you to pull the text up so that we can look at it together as we go. If you don't have a Bible, there are Bibles over there on the side table, and you can, of course, just keep it and take it home with you and have a Bible if you don't have one. Again, I'll read the text aloud. I've titled today's sermon, God's Not Hungry. Again, the text is John chapter 6, verses 48 to 51. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, and they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven, so that one may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. We are all hungry, and we see this in our text today in John chapter 6, 49. The text reads, your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, and they died. In the original Old Testament context of Israel's wilderness wanderings, post the Exodus from Egypt, God provided manna for them, which was sort of a light grain wafer that just appeared on the ground in a miraculous provision to sustain them as they wandered through the desert as they were leaving Egypt. We see manna spoken about in Exodus 16, verses 14 and 31. This is what that text says. And when the dew had gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. The house of Israel called its name manna. It was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. In its original context, of course, the provision of manna to the children of Israel wandering through the wilderness is a wonderful, miraculous provision of God to sustain them. But Jesus' point about that provision is a little bit different here. Jesus' point in this text today in John chapter 6 is not that it was a miraculous provision from God. It's that the children of Israel ate the manna in the wilderness and they died anyways. His point is that it was momentary sustenance and provision that did not feed them in a way where they were able to keep on living. They ate it and they died. This is Jesus' point about the manna in the wilderness today, that they had temporary substance that ultimately still led to their death. They ate it and they got hungry again, and that cycle of being hungry over and over again led to death. We are all hungry. And we are all eating and feeding on any number of things in our lives to sustain us in a momentary and temporary and seasonal fashion, after which we become hungry again, over and over and over again. And this cycle of being hungry and eating and then being hungry again leads over time to death and destruction in our lives. And there are a number of very hungry characters in the musical Sweeney Todd. We're going to look at 3 of them today. Really, every character in the musical has an intense hunger, but we're going to look at 3 today. The first and most obvious, actually, is society. Society is a character in Sweeney Todd, and society is very, very hungry, cannibalizing one another to get ahead. Sweeney and Mrs. Lovett justify their murderous scheme on the explicit basis that society is built on our cannibalizing of one another. This is what they sing. They sing this: "For what's the sound of the world out there? Those crunching..." There's too many quotes. There's too many. I can't sing them all. Oh my gosh. Okay, but if you know it, you're going to have to sing it with me, okay? Because then we know. "For what's the sound of the world out there? Da 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 da. You know the thing. It's crunching noises pervading the air. Da 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 da. You know the song. It's man devouring man, my dear. And who are we to deny them in here?" All right, that's the only one. Otherwise, this sermon's going to be hours long. Hours long. People are devouring one another societally, and our main characters simply say, what really is the difference if we let them devour one another literally? Our little cook shop thing is simply a physical sign of what's already going on out there in the world, because this is simply how the world works. Not everyone can win. Not everyone can get rich. Not everyone can be famous. Not everyone can be desirable. Not everyone can be powerful. Some are and some aren't. And those who are, those who do achieve one of those things in some way, inevitably get there at the expense of people who don't, even if they're trying to be as virtuous as possible, because that is how our world works. Society is hungry, chomping and biting and tasting and gnashing and grinding and gobbling each other so that we can get what we want. Sweeney and Mrs. Lovett have simply created an entrepreneurial enterprise out of this dynamic with their pie shop. They sing this: "The history of the world, my sweet, is who gets eaten and who gets to eat. But fortunately, it's also clear that everybody goes down well with beer." Hence the pie shop. The societal cannibalism that's explored in Sweeney Todd is perhaps the most obvious and initial thing that we see, but in terms of the plots, it's probably actually the least important hunger that we see. Every character is starving in Sweeney Todd, and it's the hunger of the two main characters that drive the show. Let's look at the hunger of Mrs. Lovett that's often overlooked when people consider the dynamics of the show. Mrs. Lovett is starving for a spouse. She is widowed, she's a poor shopkeeper, she's lonely, and she's socially vulnerable. Of course, it's eminently understandable that she would have this hunger, and yet it's a major theme of the show to say and explore that because we have a craving, just because we have or experience a craving, and that craving is justifiable and understandable, that doesn't mean that it's right or good to act on that craving in any way to make it come true. Early on in the show, we learn that Mrs. Lovett has fancied Sweeney Todd for some time, and not entirely for his own sake, in fact, primarily for hers. Mrs. Lovett imagines owning a thriving business, married to a dapper husband, and welcoming all the social respect and status that would come along with it. In her major song, "By the Sea," she sings this: "A seaside wedding could be devised, my rumpled bedding legitimized. My eyelids will flutter, I'll turn into butter the moment I mutter, I do." My rumpled bedding legitimized. The social aspersions that she experiences legitimized finally by being married to this individual. It's a song that lists out the fantasy of the life that she craves, and marrying Sweeney Todd is the key to it. The only problem is that Sweeney doesn't want to marry her. Sweeney has been married before. He has a long-lost wife that he, at least at the beginning of the show, is very concerned to be reunited with, and he's pining for her. And Mrs. Lovett, over the course of the show, is willing to manipulate and deceive him in order to get him to forget his true love and to convince him to marry her. She's cannibalizing him in her own unique way. As a result, it's no surprise that she sings at the beginning of By the Sea these words: "Oh, Mr. Todd, I'm so happy I could eat you up. I really could." Society's cannibalizing one another to get ahead. Mrs. Lovett is starving for a spouse. And Sweeney Todd, the titular character, is also hungry. He's hungry for revenge. In the musical version, Sweeney Todd has been wronged by an unjust judge, Judge Turpin, who has falsely imprisoned him in order to be able to dote on Sweeney's wife. He eventually assaults his wife, and when Sweeney's wife becomes mentally unable to deal with the trauma of the assault, Judge Turpin takes over the custody of their daughter and makes Sweeney's daughter his ward. And so Sweeney's murderous ways are ultimately all about having an opportunity to get vengeance on this judge. Indeed, in his major song, Epiphany, he sings this. He sings, "I will get him back even as he gloats. In the meantime, I'll practice on less honorable throats." At first, Sweeney has the desire and the hope to maybe get revenge on the judge, but to primarily find and be reunited with his wife and daughter. But it's the nature of our cravings that one ultimately wins out among the others. We really can't crave multiple things at the same time. We have one that dominates and gobbles up the others. And about halfway through the show, Sweeney's desire for revenge gobbles up his desire to be united with his wife and daughter. Here we are, the three major hungers that drive the show. Society's competitive cannibalism. Mrs. Lovett is starving for a spouse, and Sweeney is hungry for revenge. And our lives are likewise driven by hungers and cravings that drive us and dictate what we do. Hunger to win, hunger to matter, hunger to succeed, hunger to belong, hunger to love, hunger to be right, hunger to just get what's mine. And what aren't you willing to do at the end of the day when you are hungry enough? What bones won't you crunch? What flesh won't you tear into? It's not just that we're hungry in this way once or twice in our lives. We're hungry in this way over and over and over and over again. Our appetite never seems to be satisfied. Like those who ate manna in the wilderness and were momentarily fed, but became hungry again and died in their hunger, we are endlessly hungry again and again. Why are we constantly so hungry? Why are we never filled by the things that we gorge ourselves on? The show offers up an interesting answer. We are always hungry because the gods we serve are themselves hungry. The Ballad of Sweeney Todd says this about Sweeney. Attend the tale of Sweeney Todd. He served a dark and a hungry God. Sweeney's hunger for revenge was insatiable because the hunger of revenge itself is insatiable. Revenge on its own is a force, a power, almost a deity, a god in its own right, a power greater than Sweeney Todd himself, not just to give Sweeney an insatiable appetite for revenge, but to have its own hunger for revenge satisfied by feeding on someone who's giving their life for the cause. This is true of all the characters. They not only have their own appetites, they're being eaten up by the gods that they serve. Because social status is a hungry god, feeding on those who pursue it. Even romance can be a hungry god, eating up the lives of those who lust after it. Mrs. Lovett's appetite for these things is insatiable because she serves a hungry God. Success is a hungry God. The need to beat other in business or industry is a hungry God. And society can't stop cannibalizing each other because these gods are hungry. The hunger of the characters in Sweeney Todd are insatiable because the gods they serve are insatiably hungry. And they themselves are feeding on the people who serve them with their lives. This is precisely why the appetites in our own lives are never satisfied, because the gods that we serve in our lives are hungry. And they're not done feeding on you as you violently pursue your cravings in your life. Which of these hungers that we've named are you honestly starving for? Which of them make up the substance of your cravings? Success, the need to matter, the need to experience pleasure, the need to belong, the need to receive a particular kind of validation. The problem is that these things aren't just objects of our own desire. They are powers on their own that in reality are much, much stronger than we think they are, stronger even than ourselves. They are deities, false gods. The Bible calls them idols. Ultimate powers that are stronger than we are, that turn what could be good things in our lives, passions, dreams, hopes, talents, into evil things, cravings, lusts, needs, and bondage. The real issue is that these gods need us to exist. They're hungry. Success, revenge, all of these gods, they would stop existing if we would stop caring about them. If we would stop being obsessed with success, the God of success would die. If we would stop being obsessed with revenge, the God of revenge would die. And as a result, these forces have a vested interest in keeping you pursuing them. They're hungry for your devotion expressed in your life. This is why you are always hungry and why you cannot stop eating, because your hungers are rooted in false gods that are more powerful than you. They are feeding on you and make you constantly hungry for them again and again. And with them, there's no portion control. No, they won't let you stop. It's just binging them over and over again in our lives. And so we will just continue to spend our lives in the service of one or two false gods that we are craving for, feeding on them and being eaten by them over and over again in our lives by sacrificing our time and our passions and our strength in their service. Freedom from such a cannibalistic servitude would obviously be a good and wonderful thing to obtain in our lives, but we simply cannot be freed from the clutches of a hungry God. In order to be freed, we need to serve a God that's not hungry, that isn't feeding on us, and that isn't enlarging our own selfish appetites to satisfy its own grotesque desires. Where can such a God be found? Certainly not among the gods of this world with their constant chewing and feeding. But the Bible says, thank God, that there is a God in heaven, a God not of craving, but of saving, a God of love and self-giving, a God of grace and a God of mercy, a God who isn't hungry. And for every one of you who knows today that your head is caught in the mouth of a hungry God, I have very good news for you. The Bible says that there is one great, good, high, and mighty God, and he is not hungry. It's really quite a surprise that God isn't hungry. The gods of the modern world and all the gods of the ancient world were known to be hungry gods. If we were to look in the text known as the Gilgamesh epic, which contains the Babylonian flood narrative, we would see the Babylonian Noah, a guy named Utnapishtim, feeding the gods after the flood by sacrificing to them. And what we see in this text, which I'll read in a moment, is hungry gods swarming around the altar of the sacrifice because they've been so starved because no one's been able to feed them because they've been too busy dying in the flood. This is what this text says. I prepared an altar there on the mountaintop. The divine assembly smelled the aroma, and they swarmed like flies around the sacrifice. One Babylonian god said, "Let every member of the divine assembly enjoy this meal, but Enlil, one god, may not eat the sacrifice which mortals prepare." Enlil thoughtlessly created a flood. He drowned the mortals who feed the divine assembly. What we see here are needful, hungry, starving gods who are only upset about the flood because it killed the people who feed them. They're like, oh my goodness, why didn't we think this through? Now no one's going to be able to feed us now that we've eliminated everyone through a flood. The God of the Bible is so utterly different from the gods of the ancients in the modern world. The God of the Bible is totally satisfied, without need, without emptiness, without lack, without any craving whatsoever, fully settled and satiated just in himself and his own being. God's people often misunderstood this dynamic about God in the Old Testament, thinking that their sacrifices, which in the Old Testament are meant primarily to show them their lost and evil and dying state apart from God, they thought that these sacrifices fed God. But the God of the Bible is not like other gods, that he needs to be fed by us, even by the best of our religious devotion, let alone feed on us. God says this to his people in Psalm 50. If I were hungry, I wouldn't tell you. For the world and its fullness are mine. Do I eat the flesh of bulls or drink the blood of goats? Offer to God a sacrifice of thanksgiving and perform your vows to the Most High, and you call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me. I love that line. If I were hungry, I wouldn't tell you. God is not hungry. He doesn't feed on us. He doesn't need to be fed by us, which means that God is the only truly and inherently trustworthy being, a being that you can know and rely on in all of reality, because God is the only being that's not hungry. There are other creatures or people who you can learn to trust in the world because you've seen demonstrated evidence in their life that they have control over their cravings. But God is the only being who is absent of any cravings whatsoever. And so you never have to wonder when you come to the God of the Bible if your needs or his cravings are going to win out. If the God of the Bible isn't hungry, then you can trust him. In fact, God's only desire is to nourish you and to feed you so that you can be nourished to grow up into the creature that he created you to be. In pursuit of that purpose, he wants to nourish you, to feed you, to sustain you so that you can be well fed and cared for. The God of the Bible is not only not hungry, he loves to feed hungry people so that they can grow into the people God made them to be. The God of the Bible feeds you, whereas all other gods would feed on you. John 6:50 says this, "This is the bread that comes down from heaven, so that one may eat of it and not die." Whereas all other sources of food fade and leave you hungry again, the God of the Bible wants to nourish you and to fill you up with food that will never leave you hungry or craving anymore. This is all what it's actually about. The solution to our cravings and our hungers is not pretending that we're not hungry. It's not pretending that we don't have longings and hopes and wishes and desires. It's to find in our experience of those appetites a source of food that will sustain us again and again and again, that will satisfy our grumbling bellies and our starving souls. And Jesus Christ came to earth to be for you that substance, that nourishment, that eternally satisfying meal. Jesus Christ came to feed you with his body, with his very flesh. He says in John 6:48 and 51, "I am the bread of life. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever, and the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh." Jesus Christ, the life of nourishment of God made flesh, came to this earth to feed you, to offer you the meal of his broken body, that you might eat his flesh by faith and be fed. Because you are hungry. You're starving. You're not just hungry, you are ravenous, slobbering and salivating, overrun by your voracious appetite. And the issue is that you are going to fill that hunger up with something or someone. And whenever something is eaten, in order to eat something, something has to die. Something must be killed. Something must be sacrificed. One life ends so that another life can be nourished. Sweeney Todd knows this. He knows that someone must die so that his appetite for revenge must be fed. That is why, in one of his major songs, he calls his razors his friends, because they are going to feed him by drawing blood from the bodies that his desire for revenge is going to eat. This is what he says: "My lucky friends, till now your shine was merely silver. Friends, you shall drip rubies. You'll soon drip precious rubies." What precious rubies dripped from the hands and feet, the side and the brow of the Son of God, who died to feed you at the cross of Jesus Christ. Because Jesus knows that you are hungry. He knows that you are starving, and he knows that your life is run by the things that you crave. And so Jesus comes to you and he says, "Eat me. I am for eating. Stop eating other people. Stop eating your work. Stop feeding on your spouse. Stop gnawing on your friends. Stop masticating yourself. Eat me and be united to your Creator, who stops all craving and who satisfies all hunger. I've given up my body for you, so eat it." And when we heed Jesus' words and get our friends and our loved ones and our work out of our mouths, and stop worshiping at the altar of hungry gods and feed on God's Son, we are reunited with the one true God in whom we find real nourishment. For if it was in the eating of something forbidden that our earliest ancestors doomed us to the daily starvation of separation from God, then in God's great plan, he has made it such that in a great reversal, God's Son has made us found in the eating of something true. You think that when you just eat enough of the thing that you crave, you will be filled. That is not true. That is the thinking of the menu and the diet of the ways of the world. And that way of thinking is honestly keeping you enslaved, feeding on the loneliness and the lostness of your life by constantly just telling you just a few more, just one more bigger bite of that thing, and you'll have had enough. It is feeding on the body of Jesus that brings true food. For if you are hungering for worth, what could possibly make you taste your worthiness more than seeing the Son of God who died for you? And if you're starving for love, what food of love is there other than the man who lived to die on your behalf? And if you're longing for life, well, there's a lot more where that came from. If you eat the true bread that has come down from heaven, the bread that feeds you with the food of eternal life. All other foods are just poison and rotting, and you should spit them out of your mouth today and feed on Jesus instead through faith. You should believe in God's Son and live a life free, finally serving a God that's not hungry. And I want to give you 3 things to do today to begin to change your spiritual diet and serve a God that's not hungry. The first thing that you need to do is to be discerning about your appetites. We live in a world that says, Do you have a craving? Wonderful. Go satisfy that thing. This teaching is deeply unwise, and it means that our cravings end up running us instead of us running our cravings. We need to be discerning about our appetites, especially those that we think we have a right to. This is a major theme in Sweeney Todd. Many of the characters are justified and justifiable in their cravings. Sweeney, for example, is eminently justifiable in his appetite for revenge. But that doesn't mean that it is good for him or the people around him to satisfy it. This is true in the world. There are some things that we crave that are justified, but if we were to think about them, we know they're not right. Some things even that are right, that if we were to think about them, we know they're not good. We feel justified in our cravings for many reasons. We think I deserve it. We think I've been hurt. We think that person over there got it and not me. But the reality is that we don't ever want to indulge a craving. Monsters have cravings. Demons have cravings. Humans have longings and hopes and wishes and dreams. And we become more human as we learn to live and grow and stand up in those longings. The ones that are coming true and the ones that painfully maybe haven't yet. We need to be discerning about our appetites and to know when good longings and hopes and passions that I'm fundamentally in control of have become hungers, obsessions, and cravings that are now in control of me. And when we discern that a longing has become a craving, we need to do the second thing, which is fast from that craving. The first thing to do is to be discerning about your appetites. The second is to fast from fleshly cravings. Fasting is when we subordinate a hunger by not indulging it for a set period of time. That's what fasting is. Physical fasting is to subordinate physical hungers and physical needs in the service of spiritual needs, but you can fast from something spiritually by setting aside a spiritual hunger or a spiritual craving for a set period of time. Fasting has a bad rap. We think that overly religious, super intense, ascetic people fast. Fasting is actually a joyfully courageous, wonderfully healing practice to be able to do, a gift of wisdom from the God of heaven. Because fasting is not a practice that is about rejecting something. It is a practice that is about taming something. When we fast from something, we don't reject it, never to pick it up or get it back again. We fast from it to tame it and to tame our relationship to it so that we get it back in a good and better form. There are things that we need to fast from, spiritual hungers and ills that run our lives, that we need to think prayerfully in relationship with God about taking a set period of time, even just 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, fasting from something so that we can tame that hunger and it can come back to us as a good thing once again. Some of us need to fast from work. I'm not talking about piling up all your vacation and sick days off into 1 month and fasting from it. I'm talking about doing one or two courageous things at work to stop allowing your work to encroach that extra 10% on your life. To say, I'm already giving 50 hours a week here. I'm going to take 30 days where I'm going to say no to somebody. I'm going to say one courageous no. I'm going to set one courageous boundary around my email and how I engage with my email and my work on my phone. I'm going to take 30 days, 60 days where I show up and I'm not just doing the rat race of spending my whole life in service of my job over and over and over again that we're all doing here. I'm going to take one chunk of time to tame my relationship to my work so that I can get it back as a vocation and a labor that I'm in control of and that I love in my life again. Some of us could consider fasting for time from dating. like Mrs. Lovett, the desire for a spouse and a partner is a wonderful, good desire. But we know what it can be like in our lives to be overrun by the craving to have a partner. And what would it look like to say, I'm going to fast just maybe for a month, 2 months, just to create space to say, God, this longing you've given me is good, but it can easily go from a longing to a craving in my life. And so I'm going to fast from it just for a time so that I can get it back as a longing that I'm in control of and not a craving that's running my life. What if you were to fast from entertainment? All the mind-numbing, insanely overreaching ways that the world is determined to get you to show up as a willing slave at your job and then go home and binge some content where you watch somebody else live while you slave away. What an insane ecosystem we live in. What if we were just to pause for a second and say, I'm going to fast from entertainment just for a time? Not all things that are entertaining, but those cheap, easy cotton candy forms where you spend hours of your life sinking your vital forces down a dark hole that's never coming back to you. Just to fast for time. I love that show. I want to watch that thing, but I'm going to fast. It's going to be there when I come back, and I'm going to fast from it for a time so that I can know that my longing to be entertained is not a craving to be entertained. We need to identify our hungers and then, in a wise and mature way, fast from them when we need to. Not to reject them, not to call them bad, but to tame them so that we can be the ones who are spiritually alive and in control of the longings and desires that we have in our own lives. And in those moments when we are fasting from a specific hunger, we need to do the third thing, which is feed on Jesus instead. If we would pray and just sit with God in the quiet of our own souls for just a second in some of these things, it would be revealed to us very clearly what deeper hunger is present in the cravings that we have. The hunger for worth, the hunger for value, the hunger for lovability, the hunger for success, the hunger for status. And the reality is that all of these hungers were meant to be fed in your life and met in your life by God and by Jesus. We need to learn how to be able to come to Jesus and feed on Him in the specificity of the cravings that we have. To be able to say to Jesus, Jesus, you know I'm hungry to feel like I'm worthy. I believe that when you died for me, you said for all time, you are worthy. Feed me through faith and send me the Holy Spirit to testify to me, to my worth, so that I'm not craving these things anymore. We need to do these things in an active way in the cravings that we have, and if we would become people who finally are spiritually well fed. The world needs people who are done being run by their cravings. The world needs a few people who are spiritually fed. We live in a city that needs people who are spiritually fed. We live in a hungry, hungry place. A place of incredible hunger where people from all over the world flock to this place to get both their physical hungers and their spiritual hungers met. And these hungry people come to this place only to be met by the gods of this world who are all too eager to chew on their flesh and grind up their bones and to have them spend their lifeblood in the pursuit of things that are not going to ever fill them up. Who will tell them about a God who's not hungry? A God who longs to feed them instead of feed on them? Who can call them to faith to feed on eternal nourishment that's found in the love and the sacrifice of the body of Jesus? You and I would if we were first full ourselves. fed and nourished through faith in the Son of God. Do not leave here today a hungry person. Believe in Jesus Christ, who died for you that you might be fed. Amen.